Abibi Fahudie and blessings to the ancestors. This is Deshaun here, also known as D1 Beats, back with the return of the Blacklash series, where I left off over a year ago, creating informative video essays on the ideas and theories I propose as a solution for our geopolitical problems as African peoples. For those who are familiar with my past content, I created the original People's Party, or OPP, as a future vehicle to execute these ideas for development by providing historical context to prove my theories and ideas as correct through my years of studies. I took a break from creating content for OPP and Blacklash to produce my first full-length album called The Blood of the Ancestors, which features fellow Pan-Africanist artists who rap and sing, detailing the historical causes of our contemporary issues as African people. So think of it kind of like a John Henrik Clarke lecture in a musical hip-hop format. So with 2026 being a new year, I plan on releasing more OPP-related content either through video essays or private live streams, but be sure to sign up to my mailing list in the description below to stay updated with the content and the music plans I'm working on for this next year going forward. And with that being said, let's get started with today's video. Now, the subject of today's video will be centered on slavery and its role in the rise of capitalism in the Western world. The reason why this is important to understand its historical context and economic purpose of the slave trade is to also understand how it affects us contemporarily in the modern world today. To begin, the transatlantic slave trade was a historical event that was started approximately in the late 1400s and through the 1800s by primarily Western Europeans. In the late 15th century, Europe was emerging from the Black Plagues that devastated its population and was reeling from centuries of geopolitical domination of the Arab Muslim caliphates to the Near East, where the Muslim rule in the Mediterranean Sea and its conquest of parts of southern Europe limited trade prospects for European traders and merchants to improve its various kingdoms and nation-states' position. A solution was presented by Pope Alexander VI in 1494, announcing in a papal bull granting Spain the permission to claim an undiscovered land in the Western Hemisphere and Portugal the claim to land in the East to improve economic activity. This event is important because it gave European powers, then under the influence of the Pope and the Church, the political authority and the financing to find alternative routes to the East, such as Africa, and most importantly, the discovery of the New World. The discovery of the Western Hemisphere and increasing competition between Spain and Portugal over territorial claims in the Americas provides the context and the modus operandi and what's going to occur in the impending slave trade. Now, early European incursions into Africa during this time period was to attempt to build trade posts along the coast of West Africa, then gradually waging wars in the interior to establish trade bases for the slave trade. The demand for slaves was created out of the necessity for competing Spanish and Portuguese colonization of the Americas and the Caribbean, where these lands were claimed of its indigenous populations to make room for mines and large sugar and cotton plantations, which required extensive enslaved labor to extract its raw materials to profit for the white man's wealth. As explained by Philip Curtin, most Europeans sent overseas to work the plantations were political prisoners, convicts, and other unfortunate. They were expensive and supply was low. Most of the labor came at a low cost from Africa. The low real cost of a slave purchased on the African coast was a crucial factor in the slave trade. West Indian planters of the 18th century believed the price of a slave was so low in Africa it actually cost less to buy a newly imported field hand than it did to raise a slave child from birth to working age at 14 years old. The result of this triangular trade produced great profits for the early European imperial powers as the years went by, giving way to newer competing powers like England, the Dutch, and France. In Eric Williams' work Capitalism and Slavery, he explains the surplus of this triangular trade in the following excerpt in reference to the British, stating, "The triangular trade thereby gave a triple stimulus to the British industry. The Negroes was purchased with British manufacturers' products. Transported to the plantations, they produced sugar, cotton, indigo, molasses, and other tropical products, the processing of which created new industries in England, while the maintenance of the Negroes and their owners on the plantations provided another market for the British industry, New England agriculture, and Newfoundland fisheries. The impact of this newfound wealth for the new emergent capitalist class of Europeans who journeyed to the quote-unquote New World to invest in the slave trade. This wealth enabled Europe to transition from its old feudalistic economic system by overthrowing its previous monarchies, by instilling capitalist dreams across the Western world between its formative years of the 17th century up until the outbreak of European War I in the 20th century. In addition to the slave trade, not only created trade surpluses for private capitalists and new revenue streams for its mother nations, it also created technologies and sciences that enabled capitalism next phase, the Industrial Revolution, thus leading to the current global capitalist order we live in today. One example of this is seen with the invention of the steam engine, as explained by Eric Williams, as he writes, "Heavy industry played an important role in the progress of the Industrial Revolution and the development of the triangular trade. It was the capital that accumulated from the slave trade that financed James Watt and the steam engine. The steam engine's potential was not an academic question. 66 engines were in operations, 2/3 of these in mines and foundries. Improved methods of coal mining combined with the influence of steam resulted in a great expansion of the iron industry. Production increased 4 times between 1740 and 1799. The number of furnaces rose by 1/2, with the iron bridge and the iron railroad apparent during this time period." Also, the creation of these new technologies are due in part to my theory that these new technologies sources their raw materials from Africa also, as I'm going to explain. I am of the belief that the progression on the transatlantic slave trade, the Europeans, generally speaking, gradually through wars over the centuries, were able to get access to the African interior, specifically mines. These mines, when extracted, produce both higher quality raw materials like iron and those not available in Europe, such as palm oil, which is commonly used in soaps and detergents, rubber, commonly used in tires and similar uses, and in the modern day, the use of uranium, powering energy plants and nuclear weapons, and cobalt, incorporated into our daily use of and various technological devices. All of these resources, in addition to the raw materials likely sourced from Asian colonial markets, all played a contributing role in the development of these technologies due to the slave trade. So it is my belief that these technologies that preceded it was also due in part to the income of the slave trade that allowed its mother nations to finance the research and science to formulate new technologies like the steam engine to improve early capitalist production output, which proliferated into basic early consumer products such as textiles for clothing and machinery that contributed to the creation of steel, vehicles, railways, and so forth. The next example of how these technology was fueled by the slave trade is in the arena of warfare. As I referred earlier about iron being an essential input sourced in Africa, Philip Curtin explains the maturation of this metallurgical process, improving European warfare, stating, "Iron metallurgy also made revolutionary strides during the second half of the 19th century. The earliest form of usable iron was wrought iron and relatively soft and malleable, easily shaped, but also relatively expensive to make up in the 19th century to convert into pig iron, whether it was wrought iron or steel. The breakthrough to cheaper, high-quality iron products came in a series of new inventions of the 1860s and 1870s. The Bessemer converter could change pig iron into wrought iron at a fraction of its former cost. The Siemens-Martin process made it possible to do the same at even lower cost levels, thus making the basic process of making steel possible to use with easily available phosphoric ores, thus ultimately lowering the cost of production and steel, replacing iron in industrial use in railways, shipbuilding, and construction. Africa felt the impact of this new supply of better and cheaper weapons that became available to the Europeans and their African allies. Firearms technology had been comparatively stable during the 18th century, with standard infantry weapons being the weaker flint musket, which was widely available in Africa at the time period. Historically, on a macro level, these events, as I described, enabled European powers the ability to finance their industries and allowed them to expand their imperial footprint in Africa and repeat the process in Asia and the rest of the world, primarily due to the slave trade, from my point of view. The mixture of enslaved labor and, in theory, access to African raw materials were the ingredient that allowed the slave trade to fund and colonize the rest of the world through debt, resource extraction, and warfare. So in closing, the purpose of this Blacklash series is to connect these vital histories of our African race to explain the causes and symptoms of our political problems and proposing solutions through the vehicle of OPP in the future. I hope you guys found today's video informative and look forward to the next Blacklash episode, which may take form in a video essay or live stream. Also, don't forget to buy or stream my album Blood of the Ancestors, which the links are down below in the description. Until next time, a Bibi Fahudie and blessings to the ancestors.
Now they tell us forget it, that was way back then. But the profit still resides in the banks of men. Old money got roots in the cotton field grains. While we inherit the change, they inherit the gains. Reparations ain't a handout, this balance is due. Trying to tax the pain like eternal revenue.